Good morning, friends. Mark Milwee. We want to continue our study today from my study that I'm calling Grow Old Along With Me. It's from my book by the same title that I wrote a couple of years ago. And today we want to talk about the subject of how to put life into your years. A few years ago, Irma Bombeck wrote a book entitled, "It's Better to Be Over the Hill Than Under It." I love that title because life is for the living. Therefore, we need to make the most of each new day. In fact, I came across a quote that I really like. It says, "The wisest are not the ones with the most years in their life, but the ones with the most life in their years." So here's a good question for you, and a great question for me. You know, today's my birthday. And so it's a great day to talk about this, how to put life into your years. A few years ago, we were living over in Madison, Alabama, and there was a beautiful lake near our home with a well-maintained walking path around it. It was perfect for those of us who enjoy taking a good walk every day. However, excuse me. However, the longer I walked that trail, the more I noticed that it was the exact same people out walking every day. Thousands of people lived nearby, but there were only a few of us taking advantage of this wonderful opportunity. Well, that same year while we were living over there, that was the year that we had the solar eclipse. And I saw one neighbor steps outside of their home to take a look at it. Now we've moved over here in Trinity, and we're not that far from the Bankhead National Forest. Oh, it's such a beautiful place. Its colloquial name is Land of a Thousand Waterfalls, and I just love to go out there and hike and see all that beauty. But the more I talk to folks, they're like, "Well, I know it's there, but I've just never been out there, and I don't take the time to go see it." Listen, life was meant to be lived personally and experientially. As we step out and enjoy the sunset, smell the flowers, experience the eclipse, take a hike. God has blessed us with this gift of His creation, and we ought to be in awe of His handiwork and amazed by His creativity, blessed by His attention to detail. So I want to encourage you, put life into years. Put down that phone, turn off that television, shut down the computer, and step outside and experience Him in a fresh and a new way. Put life into your years. Oliver Wendell Holmes was asked why that he started studying Greek at the age of 94. He replied, "Well, it's now or never." J.C. Penney said, "At the age of 95, my eyesight may be getting weaker, but my vision is increasing." General Douglas MacArthur said at the age of 78, "Nobody grows old by merely living a number of years. People grow old by deserting their ideals." He says, "Years may wrinkle your skin, but to give up interest wrinkles your soul." And Hugh Downs, the famous 60 Minutes guy, I think he was, he said, "The older you get, you find there's a tide that kind of goes out and leaves the rocks that are important." Bible scholar Warren Wiersbe says, "The older we get, the better we understand that life is brief and moves past very swiftly." Well, if you have your Bibles this morning, I want to direct your attention to Psalm 90. Psalm 90 is the only psalm that is attributed to Moses. He reminds us that time is fleeting when he says in Psalm 90, verse 10, "The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away." Well, since this is true, I want to make a few suggestions today to help us get the most life out of our years. The first suggestion I'd like to propose is to encourage you to number your days. Verse 12 of that psalm says, "So teach us to number our days that we might get a heart of wisdom." The ancient Hebrews attributed the mind, will, and emotions to the heart. Moses clearly understood this. He faithfully led the children of Israel until he was 120 years old. Excuse me. In one of his last messages to the people, recorded in Deuteronomy 30, beginning in verse 13. This is what he said. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, by loving the Lord your God, by walking in his ways, by keeping his commandments, his statutes, his rules, then you shall live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you're entering to take possession of it. But if your heart turns away and you will not hear, but are drawn away to worship other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not live long in the land that you're going over the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curse. Therefore choose life that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice, holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days. In this passage, Moses gives us the prescription for living a long, full life. If we desire to live the life that God intends for us to live, we must choose life. In other words, we must make the choice to live for the Lord and follow his commandments, obey his word, do his will. This is the prescription for numbering our days. This doesn't mean just to consider the brevity of life. It means to consider how you are living your life on a daily basis. Again, it's more important to put life into your years than just to add more years to your life. I mean, who cares how long you live if you're not really living? We all have this choice at every age, but as we age, as we get older, as the time window begins to narrow, we begin to realize how important it is to make the most of the time that we have left. As someone said, as we watch the sands of time slip away in our hourglass, we realize the importance of living our lives God's way. This is the point Paul was making to the widows in 1 Timothy when he wrote, but she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. We don't want to fritter our lives away playing bingo and watching TV, gossiping on the telephone. We need to be involved in activities of significance. Of course, that doesn't mean we can't ever relax, but it does mean that we want to live out our days in dignity by being involved in activities that contribute to the furtherance of God's kingdom. So the first suggestion for living your life to the fullest is to number your days. Now, number two, find satisfaction. Find your satisfaction in God. In fact, the secret, listen, to putting life into your years is found in verse 14 of Psalm 90. And this is what it says. It says, satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Some of you know that my father was a bivocational pastor all of his adult life. This meant that he had to often get up early, rush off to work to provide for his family. He had to find time for quiet times and personal devotions whenever he could squeeze them in, because he was always on the run in the midst of a hectic, fast-paced lifestyle. I remember he told me once after he retired how much that he was enjoying having the time to leisurely get up and read and study his Bible now that he didn't have to rush off to work first thing in the morning. He found satisfaction in the morning through his personal time with the Lord. In fact, that's exactly what he was doing just before he died. He had just finished up with his personal devotions when the heart attack took his life. He closed his eyes in death and opened them in heaven. Well, let me ask you a question. How are you doing with your personal time with the Lord? It's kind of like that story I like. This older couple, they've been married for many years. One afternoon, they're driving along, and they get behind a car driven by this young newlywed couple. And up there in the first car, the wife was over, snuggling up close to her husband. And the older lady, she leaned over and said to her husband, "Oh, look, honey, isn't that sweet? Do you remember when we used to do that? Well, why don't we do that anymore?" And the old man just looked over at his wife and kind of grunted and said, "Well, who moved?" Listen, God is still there just like He's always been. He wants us to grow in our relationship with Him. He is patiently waiting to spend quality time with you. No matter how long you've been a Christian, you can still grow in your Christian life by making quality time with Him a priority. I understand we're all pressed for time, but we make time for what's important to us. One of my favorite cartoons is about this guy. It depicts this exhausted-looking guy with terribly bloodshot eyes. The television's on. There's a football game on. You can tell he's been watching football all day. But down below, the caption reads, "I wish I knew my Bible better." We make time for what's important for us. Where does time with the Lord fit into your list of priorities? Psalm 5:3 says, "In the morning, O Lord, thou wilt hear my voice. In the morning I will order my prayer and eagerly watch." So, don't get hung up on when to have your time. You find the time that works best for you. Some people are morning people, others are night owls. But the point is, in order to grow in our relationship with Christ, we got to find the time. In fact, we see this with all relationships. If you want a relationship to grow and develop, there has to be an investment of time. Jesus modeled this for us. Mark 1:35, "And in the early morning, while it was still dark, he arose and went out and departed to a lonely place and was praying there." So if Jesus made time alone with His Father a priority, I think we could benefit from doing the same. When I was a teenager, I worked for a man that from time to time would call me into his office. He would pull his chair up really close to mine. He would bend over, look straight into my eyes, and he'd say, "Mark, how's it going between you and the Lord?" Man, I felt like he could see, down into the depths of my soul. So I was afraid not to tell him the truth. But what about you? Are you making progress in your spiritual life, or are you just shouting? If I was to bring you in here to my office and I pull up a chair real close to me and I leaned right over and I looked right in your eyes and I said to you, "Hey, how's it going with your walk with the Lord?" What would you say? How would you respond? Well, Moses' advice is to find satisfaction in God's unfailing love. That's step number 2. Number 3 is we learn that contentment is the secret to putting life into your years. Are you content? Are you a content person? Psalm 90, verse 15. Listen to what it says. "Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as you have seen evil." Moses knew all about being afflicted. He didn't ask for that job of leading the children of Israel out of Egypt toward the promised land. He even tried to get out of it at the burning bush. We all know about that, but God wouldn't let him get away with that. He appointed Moses as a leader, and Moses obeyed the Lord's commands, but this was not without a lot of trouble and difficulty. For example, at one very critical moment when things had gotten especially burdensome, Moses cries out to God. This is in Numbers chapter 11, and he says this, "Why have you dealt ill with your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give them birth that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing child to the land that you swore to give their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all this people? For they weep before me and say, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will treat me like this, then kill me at once, if I find favor in your sight, that I may not see my own wretchedness." Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt that the burden was just so great that you just couldn't carry it anymore? Well, if you've ever felt that way, you've got a friend in Moses. He experienced these same emotions, yet he says in this psalm attributed to him, "Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil." Moses, through many years of difficulty, learned that contentment is the secret to putting life into your years. Now, here's a little secret. This doesn't mean everything's going to always go great for you. It doesn't mean things are always going to go your way. It doesn't even mean you're always going to get everything that you want. But it does mean you have learned to move beyond all these temporal things and discover what Moses discovered, that God is the source of true peace, contentment, and happiness in life. One of my favorite stories that I share often that talks about this is a story I read about a man who lived in a tiny little hut with his wife, 2 small children, and his elderly parents. Well, he tried his best to be patient and kind, but the noise and the crowded conditions just wore him down. And so finally, in desperation, he went to consult with the village wise man. He told him all about the situation, and then the wise man said, well, let me ask you something. Do you have a rooster? Yeah, I got a rooster. He said, move that rooster into the hut with you and come back and see me in a week. Well, the next week he returned. He told the wise man things were worse than ever, that that rooster was crowing all the time and making a mess out of the hut. The wise man listened patiently. He said, well, do you have a cow? He said, okay, yeah, I got a cow. He said, well, move that cow in with you and come back and see me in a week. So over the course of the next few weeks, the man, on the advice of the wise man, made room for a goat, 2 dogs, his brother's children, and finally he just couldn't take it anymore. And so one day in a fit of anger, he kicked out all the animals and all the guests, leaving only his wife, his children, and his elderly parents. And suddenly the home became spacious and quiet, and everyone lived happily ever after. I love that story because it reminds us that we need to find contentment in life where the Lord has placed us. Contentment in life is based upon attitude more than upon your circumstances. Some of the happiest people I've ever met in my life were living in cinder block homes with dirt floors in Indonesia, or living in makeshift cardboard hovels in Tijuana. I mean, I just never could get over how happy and content these people were living in these circumstances. The Bible declares godliness with contentment is great gain. Paul also says in Philippians, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. So listen, if you're tired of chasing after the wind, if you're tired of being tired, I want to encourage you to discover the secret that Moses discovered many centuries ago and find your satisfaction in God. Which brings us to the final suggestion I want to make this morning on living a full and meaningful life. And it is this: make your life count. In other words, don't waste your life on things that will not last for all eternity. Now, I've worked with senior adults for many, many years. And I can assure you that the happiest ones are the ones who are able to see the big picture. Look at verses 16 and 17 where Moses gives us the big picture. He writes, let your work be shown to your servants and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Do you want to establish the work of your hands? Do you want to leave a lasting legacy that others can follow? Well, if you do, then get involved in activities that are going to last forever. Spend time investing in your children and grandchildren. Find significant volunteer work in your community. Help your church to be the best it can be for God's glory. Pray for your pastor and staff. Find ways to lend a helping hand. Be supportive and be cooperative. Understand it's not all about you, and ask God to show you what He wants you to do, what He wants you to be involved in, and then get busy doing that work. As I said, I've worked with numerous seniors through the years. And when I wrote this book, the intention of this book was to help churches see the value of seniors, but also to help seniors see that they can either add to or take away from the life of their church. So in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to share with you some personal stories. I've actually told people if they get my book, if you don't have time to read the whole book, just read those 2 chapters. The first chapter that we'll talk about next week is called The Challenge. And that chapter is focused on individuals who never saw the big picture. They are focused exclusively on themselves and upon their personal likes and dislikes. And as a result, they're very difficult to be around. And they were often a hindrance to the Lord's work because they were so focused inward. And you know, it was all about them. But in contrast, the following chapter, I call it The Reward. And it's filled with people who see the big picture, who are focused on others. They use their talents, their gifts, and abilities to be a blessing to others. They put life into their years by being instruments that God could use to further His kingdom's work. The favor of the Lord, I believe, was upon their work and upon their hands, and they were a joy to be with and a joy to work with. Well, I think you know which group that I hope you will join and be a part of. We put life into our years by giving ourselves away in service to others. So thank you for watching today. I hope you'll come back and join with me, especially the next 2 weeks, where we look at the big picture and see how that we can either be a blessing or a stumbling block to the Lord's work. God bless you.